All right, being Brazilian is not that easy anymore. At least we are supposed to be good on soccer. Neither of these, so long trip to arrive here. Have a very nice time. Thanks, SANS, for having me here. Enjoy a lot. Conference, new friends, free beers, and all that stuff. I'm going to talk about Windows Event and the ELK Stack. The talk will be a little shorter than supposed to be because they could sometimes, but I'm focused on the ELK. I'm basing that everybody knows Windows Event better than me, probably. So who am I? I'm security research. We work in a product based on ELK. So we have a lot of fun studying stuff, learning. And one approach that we have, we are very open-minded with our stuff. And so like when you see something interesting, you try to share, like do a webinar or try to speak somewhere. I have 2 patents about detection malwares, PDF and one for HTTP headers. I love login and PCAPs. I'm a dad now, like not now, 2 years, son, that using all my free time. So I could not have that fun anymore, but things change. And I do triathlon and I love beer. And that's hard. It's hard to love beers and do triathlon, trust me. And so, our agenda, the motivation to create this talk. Windows events, like just have 1 slide. ELK Stack, where we spend more time. I think like most know about EventIDs. I record some demonstrations. So I was doing and adding a lot of slides and screenshots. No. I have like 100 slides. And some conclusions, like just some tips. And so motivation. First, I want to detect malicious activities. That's where it's happened. The second one, like fraud. I want to monitor where if somebody is changing permissions for a user, giving administration, or somebody's trying to access some files that's not supposed to be accessed by a regular user, this kind of stuff. Forensics, like if you want to see what's happened in the past in your company, you probably need to have the log saved somewhere. And EventID doesn't get saved too long, like depending on the configuration and the amount of events you have, like maybe in some hours, minutes, or days, they will erase the old stuff. And something that I like is to back to the future, like I like to do like kind of threat hunting, like we are always improve the detections, the scripts we have, and what we would like to do is like to run against all the data set we have. Because what's usually happens is when you think you will get owned, probably it's happened like months or maybe years. And so I want to do that. And to have all that, we must have the events. And so if you don't have the events, we could not find anything. And as Bob Marley song, right? No logs, no crimes. It's not that. So we need to save that. Right, so talking about EventIDs. Basically, we have 9 categories, 50 plus subcategories, 100 different EventIDs and fields. There's a lot of information that we could retrieve from there, like process creation, access to a file, logins. One problem that we have difference between Windows versions. And so like, sometimes you have everything ready with some EventIDs, and so they just change everything else. And I put here a limit of 300 megabytes. It's not exactly that, but I read after that start to, depend on your machine, start to be a little slow to handle the events. And if you want to know more about Windows events and some auditing and stuff like that, Michael, that's here, he has a nice cheat sheet. I learned the word. At Malware Archaeology website, he has a cheat sheet. He has a PowerShell a PowerShell to enable everything for you. So that's a very nice resource. And he's here. You could talk to him. So now talking about the Elastic. In the past, it's used to call ELK, I think most of the time. And so like in February, they did the Elasticon, and they changed a bit, and they start to call ELK Stack, because now they have bits. And so I think they don't like bulk or something like that, and so they just call ELK Stack. And so the ELK Stack basically is bits, Logstash, Elasticsearch, and Kibana. Mostly of my time I will talk about here at Logstash on the ingestion. I think where you could do some magics and add content metadata. And my talk will be based something as this. Like you have bits sending information to Logstash that we will archive at Elasticsearch. And so you have the API here talking to Elasticsearch, and you have Kibana with nice views and everything else. And the talk after mine, they are going to speak more about Kibana and more detail about the API. So that's nice, because I don't have time to explain everything, and so then that kind of happens. Good about having that talk after mine. And so the API here could correlate with anything you want. That's the nice. So I will drill down in every of the steps. So you have Winlog Bit. Like I think most of my deploys, the production deploys, I'm using NXLog. I'm not using Winlog Bit, because Winlog Bits, they start to have all the information I need something around May, when they release a version that they send all the event data, that information. And so mostly I have it in my labs, in my stats, but I'm not using it on production. I'm still using NXLog, but both works. NXLog has some restrictions about some information in very specific situations. I don't have all the information. At one point, like I was trying to monitor the exchange, the changes about like the full access to some account. I have the information like, oh, somebody has full access. So I have who has full access to other accounts, but I don't have who changed it. So that's the kind of information that you use in Winlog Bit you have. Or if you buy the NXLog, the pro version, not the community version. So talking about Winlog Bit, so it's open source. You could choose whatever you want to send, everything, or you could specific. It uses some certificates just to encrypt the communication. And it's pretty easy to install, as NXLog. Both are pretty simple. Oh, but if you want to use anything else, you could use, like I'm just suggesting about something. So we have Logstash. Here is the nice part. Logstash could receive information in any format, probably. Any format. It's magic. It's something and after you ingest the information, you could do some analysis locally before adding to the Elasticsearch. You could do some archiving. You could generate alerts directly at Logstash. You don't really need to send information to Elasticsearch. But the nice part, like, you could have multiple outputs. You don't need to just say, okay, I'm sending to Elasticsearch. You could send to Elasticsearch and another output that you send to Slack or send to PagerDuty. And internally, it works like that. We have the input. Input could be like, you could become a syslog, listen some part. You could read a file. You could execute some commands that you pick the information somewhere. And you have a lot of options. And you have a lot of codecs. That's important, because the codecs do some magic. Sometimes just you use the codec. Like you have codec for NetFlow, you have codec for event logs, you have codec for JSON. And so those codecs make the life much, much easier. You don't need to work that hard. So you have the filters that I'm going to explain a bit more about that. But filters, you have a lot of options, If you go to the documentation, you see that you have a lot of different options, a lot of alternatives. One problem that I saw, maybe it's me, maybe maybe general overview. Like if you go to the documentation, official documentation, you saw every sample is all the same, and you figure out like how I use that. And so you go to somewhere else, like you see people asking us, you see a real demo, a real sample, and so you say, oh, that's it. So like documentation is not that good in my opinion, but it works after you understand that very well. When you're a learner, you kind of get messed with amount of information. And so you have the output. The output, as I said, you could have one output. Like since we were talking about the ELK Stack and ELK, we're sending to Elasticsearch. But you could send to another different place, generate a kind of more alerts, and save at Elasticsearch for another reasons. So, log stash filters. I just add some that I thought was interesting to parse the information, to add metadata. Grok is a kind of, you could create a rule that you process your log. It doesn't matter the format log you have. You could easily process that information. JIP. JIP is very interesting because you could JIP the source, the IPs that you were receiving, and maybe you figure out, oh, why am somebody from China connect on my RDP remote desktop? Oh, why my machine is talking to Ukraine or Russia or something else? Maybe it's something legal, maybe not. We have the date. That's very important because when you date, you parse the information with the date from the event, so it will ingest to Elasticsearch with the really correct date. It's not going, because if you don't have the date, it will ingest mostly with the date of they're being ingested. We have the cipher. If you have something critical, you don't want to be in plain text, you could use a key and encrypt the information. And so if you need to work with that information, you could decrypt. So like EventID probably, maybe you will not need that, but depends on the information. You have translate and dictionary. That's very, very interesting because it could add metadata. Like a lot of information are just codes. And sometimes if you send like to the analyst, like just a lot of codes, they will take some time to process because like especially like EventIDs. And so you could just like if this EventID add this message that you know that they will process faster. Or maybe the stats codes of some like 404. Oh, let's put not found. Let's make the nodes quickly. We have the CIDR that you could like if those range of IP add this tag, for example. And so when you work with some API or something like that, you have another filter, another option like, oh, this place, this subnet is not supposed to talk to this subnet, but you have names and make much easier. You have mutate that you could remove fields, add tags, convert, change. You have the XML, that's pretty cool. Like, for example, like the data that Kevin showed, like when they're doing the forensics, you could easily input to Elasticsearch and create some views and work with the information there. That's much faster than you parsing. Like, imagine a file with 1 million different XML entries. It would take forever to grab. Oh, JSON, that's how NX log send the information. That's pretty easy. Like, you don't need a filter. Like the default, you don't need a filter. Mostly you don't need a filter. Because if you use the codec JSON, it will do all the hard work for you. And drop. Like, since sometimes you don't want to depend on the system administrator, you enable everything, send everything for me. Okay, I don't have process to work with everything. You just drop what you don't want. But when you want, you have the information there. And so you don't need to ask, oh, now enable that, now enable that, now enable that. So drop, or maybe drop something like that you're not being used and using a lot of process. So drop is make life a bit easier. And so pro tip, Since like I'm thinking like you're not adding only event IDs to the system. So, and if you're talking just about event IDs, like a lot of different events, they have different names for IP. Like you have that IP address, you have source IP address, we have a field that's called IP address. And so like if you want to create some graph or some views or correlate like with another data source, if you use some naming, that will point like the username, the workstation, because the only event ID, they have different names on the fields from the same content. Imagine like when I want to correlate with the IDS and with the antivirus or whatever you want. And so I used to put something like global.ip, and so I have that extra variable. I don't remove the old variable. I keep the original variable. But I add this, and so when I need to correlate, I have that variable that's pretty easy for me to. And when you need to navigate between different index, you don't need to create a new filter again. Like, just make sure that I'm on time. And so that's a very simple config file. You have input, TCP here. I'm not using bits. I'm just showing with the NX log. We have a port. You could choose whatever. I add a tag just to have specific information. Like for this example, is Windows, the Active Directory service. And so I put the codec here. And the type, I use that. So, and I use type mostly to do some if inside my configuration. And so like this is very important. If you don't use codec JSON, it's not going to work since my configuration at nxlog. And so here I tried to show some stuff, but it's a filter like if type AD. So I match the event sign. Event sign is the field that has the, and so it has this format. But you could, as you could see, you could use any format you want or you need. And so like if destination address mutate, I will add field with global IP, but I will add as dest with the contact dest address, for example, and I will gel IP on destination. And here with the source and the IP address, and so I will have everything added to the same variable, but I'm keeping I'm not using remove because we have remove field. You could just remove the information. Sure, as more fields we add, we need more space. And so that's kind of mix. Like if you don't have enough space, you probably need to remove some fields. And here I did the same with some users, but since users you don't have gel IP, it's much easier. And so like if I need to do some graph or something else. And a very simple output, you point to the server you want. You could have multiple servers. The number of works, the codec, the index name. I used to have a separate index for each of the data source I have. I don't put everything in the same because it could become so big and get slow and that's kind of information. You don't need to have all that information. If you put host here, it's enough. It will send. But you could have like Elasticsearch, and here you could have another that you send to Slack and everything else. So you could just save the information, but you have a war room at Slack, and so, oh, something happened. And so, or open a ticket. It's all, you could code anything, so it's very powerful. So Elasticsearch, I would just, it's open source, it's free, it's based on Apache, Lucene. And it's very fast. That's, I think, the trick. Like, it's very, very fast. And you could use a single node or multiple nodes, and you could grow very fast when you need. That's the good size, like a good side. And you don't need to pay extra. Like, you have a configuration, and you just duplicate and change the node name, and it's part of the cluster. One point that I want to raise a flag. It's very insecure by default. Like, you need to do some hardening locally. We do like just saying quickly, you do a reverse prox with Nginx, so they need to authenticate. We have some paranoid, like, since like we could use cur on the local host on the part of the Elasticsearch. We have a rule at IP tables that match the user ID of root. Only root could connect to the Elasticsearch port. So the user need to escalate the privilege. And we use audit to save any command that someone type. And so we are, at least we know who did that or when. And so we have Kibana that I'm just showing briefly. Kibana has discover, filter, and analysis visualizations that help and improve the analysis and the response. Dashboards and plugins. Plugins, most of them are paid and need a subscription, but they have time million that I really suggest you to take a look. And so here is a dashboard, a simple dashboard that I'm using the Kibana 5. It's an alpha version, but I like to live dangerously. Like I'm doing a lot of tests, but it's very clean. I really like it. And we have the Python API. They're probably going to talk better than me, but mostly you just pipe install Elasticsearch and you're good to use. All right, I think that's it. Do you have any question? I don't think you have time, but
we've got time for a question or two.
Okay.
Got a question for Rodrigo.
I hope you don't have questions.
Don't let him off that easy, especially with that remark. Anyone?
No question about soccer, please.
Or the Olympics?
Olympics.
Anyone? All right. Well, with that, thank you, Rodrigo.
Thank you very much.